This is a national emergency.
Detonator charge.
We're in a race against the Nazis. And I know what it means if the Nazis have a bomb.
We have a 12-month head start.
18.
How could you possibly know that?
We've got one hope. All America's industrial might and scientific innovation connected here. A secret laboratory. Keep everyone there until it's done.
Let's go recruit some scientists.
Build a town, build it fast. If we don't let scientists bring their families, we'll never get the best.
Why would we go to the middle of nowhere for who knows how long?
Why? Why? How about because this is the most important thing to ever happen in the history of the world?
You're the great improviser, but this you can't do in your head.
Are we saying there's a chance that when we push that button, we destroy the world?
Chances are near zero.
Near zero.
What do you want from theory alone?
Zero would be nice.
This is a matter of life and death. But I can perform this miracle.
World War II would be over. Our boys would come home.
That's happening, isn't it?
World.
Okay, well, I'll get started. Well, this is, we haven't done this in a few weeks. I've totally forgotten the name of the podcast. Logos Theater 3000, and we get to do such a great movie today. We're doing Oppenheimer, and right before the Odyssey comes out, comes out on Friday. Yeah. And so what I've been hearing is that really, Nolan said this, and I know you're a big Nolan fan, which I was surprised, Bill, that you haven't seen this movie until recently. Nolan said in an interview that the success of Oppenheimer is the reason why he got to make this movie, The Odyssey. So they kind of do go together because it was so successful, in the Academy Awards, and it was successful at the box office, that production companies gave him the money and the schedule to be able to make Odyssey, which is what I've been hearing is the most epic movie made since probably Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it comes out on Friday. I think it's one of those movies you have to see it in IMAX, so that's the preferred form to see it in. So so we're talking about Oppenheimer, which I think it's Nolan's best movie. Yeah, okay, so that'll be good. This is great. I'm looking forward to the back and forth on that. So I'll just ask you, number one, the movie is about Robert Oppenheimer, who was the man behind the atomic bomb, right? And Los Alamos and the project that the U.S. military initiated during World War II because of the fear that the Nazis were going to get the bomb before the U.S. And then leading up to the point of really the movie being not just about the atomic bomb per se, but about Oppenheimer and even his protest against the hydrogen bomb and the kind of the progress of atomic weapons and those different things. So first, again, I know you're a Nolan fan and this is not your favorite one. You can talk about that, but kind of your impressions seeing the movie. What did you like? What you didn't like? All those things.
Yeah. I mean, it is definitely a good movie. I first tried to watch it on a flight and fell asleep 30 minutes in and kind of lost interest, but
sure,
gave it a go again for this, and I did like it. I thought it was great. I I really like his sci-fi kind of stuff, like
Right.
Inception, Interstellar, Tenet, those kind of movies. Maybe it's just a genre, uh,
Yeah.
but
Because
yeah,
this movie is probably more like Dunkirk because it takes an
yeah,
historical event.
yeah, and
Um,
I like Dunkirk. Having the movie setting provides a little more, I guess, like context for the historical events. It's different when you read about it in a history book versus watch it on a screen.
right.
Personalized. Of course, I don't know how much of the personality stuff is dramatized. One of the big elements in this one is that Oppenheimer at the very end is painted as a guy who kind of regrets what he's done to develop the weapons and not trustful of the government's ability to use self control with them. Um,
Right.
I don't know what the reality actually was. That may be true to the true to stuff, but I don't know if it was. I mean, it certainly made for a good movie.
Right. Yeah. So the movie is based off the book, um, and actually the quote in the beginning of the movie, Prometheus, which is the name of the book, stole fire from the gods and gave it to man. For this, he was chained to a rock and tortured for eternity. Which that quote is important to like really the scope of the movie of a brilliant man who created something. I mean, he had in some ways, in the beginning of the movie, with his kind of like when he's over in Europe and he is, kind of thinking through like the quantum kind of perspective of atomic energy and atomic power and all these different matters. And the whole idea, can you hear the music, right? He's kind of tortured by these thoughts and ideas. And then the US government comes to him during the war and says, hey, like basically that they are wanting a weapon that could end the war, right? And so he becomes the man who takes on this project. But then like as you sense the guilt, as you were saying, that he starts to feel throughout, that he has, and I think really the heart of the movie is that like scene, which Nolan can never tell a story from like start to finish. It always has to have these weird time
Mhm.
layers. And Oppenheimer is big on this, like the conversation at the beginning of the movie that Oppenheimer, as Robert Downey Jr.'s character, what's his name? His name is Louis Strauss, right? And he's a governmental bureaucrat, right? I think is he running the atomic energy like.
I get the impression he was also a scientist as well, but he's certainly the. Hold on a second,
Oh, you're good.
turn that off. I got the impression that he was a scientist, but he's also very bureaucratically connected. Yeah, he's kind of the villain, right?
Yeah, and he is mocked by Oppenheimer in that kind of congressional like hearing, and he kind of takes that personal, and that's kind of some of the momentum to their kind of feud. But there's that conversation that in the beginning of the movie, where he is being, I guess he works for Princeton, right? And Oppenheimer is hired, and Einstein's there, right? And Einstein and him walk, and all you get at the beginning of is Strauss's perspective on
Yeah,
their like interaction. He doesn't know what they talk about, and nor do
yeah,
you as the audience. And
right.
not until the end of the movie
Mm.
do you get the conversation. And I think it was a brilliant way of kind of like building the movie that like, and then basically you're told at that moment at the end when he says, "Do you remember when we were afraid that it would create a chain reaction and destroy the world?" And Oppenheimer says, "I think we succeeded." Basically saying we have now created the power for humanity to really destroy the world, right? And then of course the movie ends with all the like missiles, the intercontinental missiles, like firing and kind of creating this doomsday world that we all kind of maybe don't realize we live under, but actually we do, in a lot of ways. I mean, there's ICBMs are pointing at the U.S. by North Koreans and by the Chinese and by the Americans. I mean, by the Russians per se, and you could just as he ends and he's looking into the camera, just someone whose work has been there's a massive amount of just guilt that what he's created. But even though like that's an interesting part of the story, I don't know my favorite Max and my most I think my favorite part of the story is really the communistic background and the suspicion that they have about Oppenheimer, and that whole like his kind of that kangaroo court in that back room where he's sitting there, and find that an interesting story because of we don't realize during that time how many of those like brilliant scientists and stuff that the U.S. government used were persuaded by communistic belief, like way before it was like not popular to be communistic, right?
Yeah, that's been kind of there's a long history of that in the super, educated elite, group of people that are kind of swayed by I think the theoretical, um, maybe supposed benefits of communism. I think that the rest of the world lives a little bit more in realism and looks at the history of communism and can say that practically speaking, like there may be some compelling theory, but it's not something that is can be implemented successfully with fallen people. Uh,
Yeah, I wonder when we think about this movie as Christians, what should we take out of this movie? Like, I think you can be very super patriotic and say America won the war, and we dropped the bomb on Japan twice, and that was the right thing to do. What are your thoughts? Because like I would say one of the most interesting scenes from this movie, obviously, like the atomic bomb going off is super intense, right? But I think I don't know what the scene where Oppenheimer goes into the Oval Office with Truman,
yeah.
which I don't know if you recognize who plays that part, and
I watched it like 2 weeks ago.
yeah, so Gary Oldman plays that.
Oh, okay.
Truman, and of course, just to kind of the scene was Oppenheimer basically says like I feel like there's blood on my hands, and and Truman takes off the handkerchief and throws it at him and says, basically I'm not. They don't care about the person who built the bomb. They care about the person who dropped it, and that was me. And basically, as he leaves the office, he says, "Don't ever let that crybaby back into my office again." Like you're just like, wow. The Truman's just like, and again, I don't know, like you said, I don't know if that's an accurate depiction of Truman per se, but how quickly he's like, that was the rational thing to do. It was the right thing to do, and I feel no guilt or remorse for it, and just like moves on.
Let me give you a little bit of trivia real quick. The only thing I learned about Harry Truman when I was in high school, that his middle name is the letter S.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's hilarious.
If you look at it, like an actual, like a lot of people don't know that, but like S, they put like Harry S. period Truman. There is no period, or there's not supposed to be.
Wow,
Middle name is the letter S.
that is hilarious. I think his father was like a shoe salesman, right? I mean, he came from pretty much nothing in Missouri to becoming vice president, and then obviously when FDR died, he becomes president and becomes the one who brings an end to the war. Um, and I think that anytime you talk about the atomic bomb in that time period, you're kind of forced to ask the question: was that the right thing to do? And I think it's interesting. Oppenheimer even says it. Like he's like he was talking to the scientists, who like basically when the Germans had when Hitler killed himself and the U.S. and the Germans had surrendered. The view was like, well, we don't need to use the bomb now, right? We obviously we beat the Germans. We have the bomb. We can kind of like de-escalate this. But then Oppenheimer rationalizes with the scientists, like, no, we built two bombs. They have to use them because we have to make show that we have the technology, and then we have to show them that we're willing to to not only use it, but that we are going to use it as many times as necessary to end this war. And you can tell like the scientific community, like, well, why does this need to be like a weapon? Why can't we just de-escalate this? And but
Well, so here's what was interesting to me because Oppenheimer is the scientist who kind of cracks the code on the science part of the bomb, right? But
right,
he really kind of got himself ingrained in like the policy making use of
right,
the bomb, where I don't think that what qualification did he have ethically or morally to become like a policymaker or policy advisor beyond the fact that he understood how the neutrons and atoms and stuff worked together. Um, because he was hired to do a job, but then he kind
right.
of crawled out of his sphere, and he was permitted to. So maybe
Hmm.
that was the thing, but that was kind of interesting. But I do want
Yeah,
to.
I think your point is valid, because I think that is kind of the idea. Is like, you were hired to build the bomb, you successfully built the bomb. Now it's our responsibility to use it as we please. But I think where Oppenheimer became more openly opposed was when it got to the point where they were developing the hydrogen bomb, right? And I think that was if you remember, that was the scene like at the dinner table, and Louis Strauss was there, and they're having this conversation about, but now that the Russians have the atomic bomb, we then have to create the step above, right? We have to create the hydrogen bomb. And if we don't do that, then we're gonna basically be under the threat of being, the bomb being used on us. Where Oppenheimer is saying, now that we've used the weapon, now that we've, and I think he was even articulating we should even share the technology with the Russians, so
Yeah.
that we create this like equality, that we never in this race for the bigger and better bomb that could be a threat to the other power. But I think that's where he got into the like policy making and became more openly opposed um, to to the use of the weapons they created. It was when they got to that hydrogen level.
Well, there's two things that I was wanted to talk about that you mentioned. One of from looking at this from a Christian perspective, what's right and wrong.
Right,
Uh, Two ideas. One of them being, you know, can you gauge the moral value of choosing to drop this bomb from like a utilitarian perspective? Obviously, that's the logic that I think is used because you kill a few to save more.
right,
Is that a Christian a legitimate way for Christians to interpret that? Because there's more than one ethical framework that can be applied. The other piece of that is, um, you know, once the train starts moving, the bomb was going to be developed eventually by, Russia, and it was,
right,
there's a lot of countries that have the weapons now. So, do you have then a moral obligation to develop the weapon in defense of your own people? Like, so it's kind of weird that I know I say a lot that um, the reason you do a thing is often more important than the thing you actually do. Like,
right,
you can develop a weapon maliciously in order to you know overrun everyone around you, or you can develop it defensively because you have to. Otherwise, you'll
right.
be just fodder for everybody else. So you have to maintain a position of strength, and that I don't think it's wrong to defend yourself. But yeah, like it's kind of a trolley problem question, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think when there's a great book that I just read a few months ago on nuclear war, and really the view amongst most experts, on kind of like war theory, especially when it comes with nuclear weapons, there is no winner, there are only losers. And so, even if you run all the if you knew that movie, what was that movie? War Games. You ever seen War Games with
Yeah,
Matthew
that
Broderick, right?
games. Yeah, yeah.
Right, and the viewpoint of that movie was like, it's almost like, tic tac toe, like you want to play a game, and there's no winners. and it kind of told the tale that we have. I think the viewpoint at that time was, well, we'll have enough weapons that we can just kind of overwhelm the opposition. But the problem is that what's the difference between having 50,000 nuclear weapons to like 5 nuclear weapons? You're not.
5 can also do the job. Well,
Yeah, exactly.
You got to consider as well that so the U.S. like strategic stance, at least during the Cold War, was a position of deterrence, right? Like,
Right.
we have a lot of weapons. The Soviets have a lot of weapons, and we both have the ability to use them. So in order to prevent everybody from dying, no one's going to shoot them, and it relied on the heads of state for the two superpowers being rational and predictable actors or characters, and our nuclear ballistic missile submarines can go anywhere in the world. It's a deterrent. Nobody wants to shoot those things, but the threat of violence is the peacekeeper, right? And so if one superpower has a threat that doesn't have its equilibrium somewhere else, that they have like an unopposed superpower, single superpower, then that's destabilizing. Um, yeah, I mean I think they kind of were forced to develop that weapon all the way to completion because it provided they weren't. I don't think they were trying to become a one single superpower on Earth. I think they were just trying to maintain an equilibrium. You know.
Yeah, and I think I think it presents an interesting point to. I think there has been times where the U.S. and the Russians have tried to de-escalate and try to, bring nuclear weapons and technology to a level where they're not so much of a threat. But I think especially with the Iranians, which is a pretty important topic in this,
That's a tone shift
yeah,
because
exactly.
they don't have the rational leadership that a country like Soviet Union or Russia or the U.S. People would argue about how rational these countries are, but Iran, North Korea, like some of these countries don't have a history of rational decision making
They
and
don't.
are not reliable, so they therefore can't be trusted to maintain a balance because they don't necessarily have the same goal in mind that we do. Actually, I am reading a kind of interesting book right now. It's fiction, but there's a TV show based on it called Silo, but the book is Wool, and then I think the next one is Dust, and then Shift. It's a trilogy, but the kind of one of the plot points is that Iran, ironically, develops this nanotechnology that can just float through the air and kill anybody they don't like. And
Hmm.
the U.S. in response to that makes their own version, but they go too far and just destroy every single person on planet Earth except for like a small community of Americans who are going to survive this post-apocalyptic world for a few hundred years and then repopulate the earth as the good guys. That's
Gotcha.
obviously morally wrong as well. But I'm really curious on your stance on how Christians should interpret like utilitarian ethics, like what is right and wrong and why. Like dropping the bomb, kill a smaller amount in order to prevent,
Hmm.
10 times the amount of death that would ensue. And then what is the Christian stance on utilitarian ethics?
Yeah, because it's if you've ever not seen the movie, but read The Watchmen, right? The comic book by Alan Moore. The viewpoint is it's like, is it rational to kill millions to save billions? Right. That's kind of the theme.
Same thought process.
Same thought process here, and I think it goes into Augustine's just war theory of 220,000 Japanese died. Now the viewpoint was that many of those were civilians that died, and the question is, and of course, in Augustine's just war theory, when civilians are brought into the equation, that's when the unjust war viewpoint comes into play. And I think, of course, you work for the American military. Like the view is to keep civilian casualties at a minimum, right? That's the goal.
And nobody wants
Yeah,
to hurt.
exactly. Can you be perfect? No. I mean, it's war. It's not. It's hell, right? War's hell. But like that's the goal. And so in this particular scenario, and I think World War II in particular, in and of itself, was such a. I mean, we think about all the different wars of the world. Like this was the most like epic one of all time, right? The scope is like from one end of the globe to the other. You're talking about masses amount of deaths like across the board, and the desire to end the war, and knowing that the Japanese would never surrender. I mean, that was kind of the viewpoint. How could you shock them into it? And I do think it was, and I mean, this is probably arguable, but it's probably the hardest decision any president has ever made, other than maybe Lincoln's Civil War decisions. It has to be the hardest one. And, putting myself in the situation under the conditions of Pearl Harbor, what they knew about the deaths of Jews and the deaths of others in China and other areas, like I can see why we had to
Well,
drop it.
I wonder if it's probably quite difficult to weigh the moral rightness or wrongness of the action, knowing the outcome afterwards. You probably the best you'd kind of have to analyze that issue of should you drop the bomb or not in a vacuum without knowing the outcome, because when you make a decision, you make the best decision you can based on the information you have at the time. And so, like, we can say now that it was the right thing to do because it did end the war, but if it hadn't ended the war, then we'd say, well, it was the wrong thing to do because we killed all these civilians and then the war didn't end. But you'd be operating, making that choice based on the same information you had. There's it's really difficult to weigh the the moral outcome, or more the morality of the choice that was made, knowing the outcome already.
Yeah, I was remembering, like the rationality, like, and I wrote it down. Like, we have to drop two bombs, once so that they know we have it, twice that we plan to use it until they surrender. And I guess with that logic, the U.S. were planning to drop as many of them as they had to end
Mm.
the war.
That's
And I think I didn't think we were going to go here, but I think it was President Obama was the first president to go back to Hiroshima, and I think it was like 70 years or so, maybe after the dropping of the nuclear bomb. And just and I think it's interesting, as a part of the how history works itself out, that the country that dropped the bomb is the same country that helped reestablish the Japanese after the war. And actually, someone actually was talking about this, and I don't remember who it was. And I think it may have been Charlie Kirk. I can't remember. It was some video that I was watching. I can't remember who it was, but they were making the comment that never in human history has a country that went to war with other countries been the ones that did all the heavy lifting to bring development back to that same country. And I don't know if America gets enough credit for that because of recent history and some of our, people pointing out our sins, right, as a nation. That the U.S. and I think this, and I think it goes into, like, at the heart of the American culture. Well, not universal by any means, but at the heart of it, there is a I don't know if we want to say genetic, but at a kind of at a small, like, under the surface level, that this is a nation who, in its Declaration of Independence, stated, all men are created equal, and are all given rights by God, right? And I think there's a sense where when America, it tends to, like, in that moment, like, it said, we did this to end the war, and now we're going to help these countries get back to civil,
yeah.
to a point of be able to flourish. And what other nations other than Western Europe and Japan have thrived the way they have since that war? And the U.S. has been one of the major reasons why. I think that's something interesting just to think through, that is by God's sovereignty, obviously, and by his providence, and by using America in that way. But and we haven't talked about this, but even Nuremberg, which is another example of America, who was a major leader in that, showing like the world justice and not just rage. And I think it's something maybe we just don't talk about enough, that those are examples of God's grace through nations, that the U.S. showed grace to Japan, they showed grace to Western Europe and Germany. And I think that's something interesting.
People who disagree with you would probably say, "Oh, well, that's easy for you to say. You know, you won. You can do whatever you want."
Right. Sure.
But it's also easy to say, "Well, we didn't, take over the world." You know, there's
right.
I have seen the thing you're
right. Exactly.
About. And it maybe is it a little bit in our cultural DNA, or as the fact that I suppose the U.S. could have made Japan like the 51st state.
Could have. Could have.
Or they could have encouraged the Europe to just delete Germany
right.
as a country,
right?
But I think that the U.S. did show a lot of dignity in the aftermath to rebuild. There was no empire building going on, but you see a lot of that in like online type of media and discussion about how that it's the U.S. is very much like an empire builder. I disagree,
right,
like, in the strongest way possible, because we've had ample opportunity to build huge empires and chosen absolutely not to. I mean, you think about like Iraq and Kuwait and those countries, like the U.S. could have assimilated Iraq into its own governmental structure, but it didn't. It the rightness or wrongness of going back into Iraq a second time is debatable, but certainly I don't think it was a malicious move by the government to turn Iraq into part of the United States, and it hasn't done that. But there is an element of respecting other cultures, I think, that gets certainly glossed over by our opponents. People who even Americans who dislike our country, that choose to ignore certain very convenient facts when they are forming their arguments against our country online. Um, I think the U.S. has a very noble and dignified history of its relationship with its other countries.
Yeah, I think if I remind, I think it's Elon Musk that made that comment, and I would. I think the funniest line, I would think the most ironic line in this whole movie, if you remember, was like when Oppenheimer said that like really they had a major advantage over the Nazis. Do you remember this? Oppenheimer makes this comment. He says, "We have one great advantage. I believe we can catch up to the Germans is that Hitler considers this Jewish science."
Oh, I do remember that.
And I think that was just like, wow. And I think maybe even to a point of like, again, I think for us love history, to not be like major advocates of the sovereignty of God, that like if Hitler wasn't a Jew hater the way that he was, how that word could have been different in the aftermath. But like literally even that, his hatred of the Jews was one of the reasons why they did not actually accomplish developing the atomic bomb. And really even to a point where like I think even one of the uniqueness about America is that in all of our faults we tend to still we're not so like ridiculously crazy. We tend to be very like the desire to like achieve the desired end, and therefore we will do what is necessary to get to that end. Same with like the Apollo moon mission, right? And all these different matters. We're gonna like use all that we got together. We're gonna accomplish this end. And where Hitler is like, no, we're not gonna do this because I hate Jews. Like, I'm not gonna like listen or utilize this or that. And like, I think that was an interesting like part of and Oppenheimer obviously being a Jew
Well,
himself.
that makes me think of there's I don't know if you recognize the irony in this, but and I say this I do not categorize myself as a dispensationalist, and with two separate people of God, the Jews and the church that I have their own. I don't see the world that way.
Right.
Um, but um, I often see the left accusing the right of being Nazis. Yet the left are often the ones that are the biggest, anti-Semites, right? Aren't they the crowd that are most likely to root for the Palestine and the Palestine Israel conflict? And so I remember years ago when this all was new to me, I suppose, but feeling like people should be walking very gently around the anti-Jewish language because it feels kind of Nazi-ish. But the the people who hate the Jews currently are the ones throwing around the insult of Nazi to the ones who are typically more supportive of Israel, and I think that's kind of ironic.
Yeah, it's ironic, and I find that the use of labels like that are so anti-intellectual. Like you can just say, "Well, I don't have anything. I don't have any like productive to say, so I'll just call you an anti-Semite, or I'll just call you a Nazi." Like as if like if I could throw this label at you, like I'll win, And I just find that we're so quick in some ways to go to those ends when the Nazis legitimately
Yeah.
like murdered 6 million Jews. And so to say something like to say something that is either anti Israeli or something like that, and then to quickly go to like you're a Nazi or you're an anti-Semitic is this like such a just a ridiculously horrible thing to do that I find that it doesn't provide any type of productive discussion about any important matters whatsoever.
I read a book about Bonhoeffer a few years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things I had not realized, Hitler was elected with a minority vote, like
Right.
something
Yeah.
like
It was a
only
political
30% of
compromise.
the population, right?
Correct. Right.
And
Right.
and so there was, and Germany was a major hub for uh, Protestant thinking and theologians for centuries. You
Right.
know, so there, he was not alone in his disdain for Nazi party tactics and leadership and philosophy. So it must have been life must have been hard for probably honestly what was probably a majority of the German population who was Christian,
Mm-hmm.
with a long tradition of like theologically astute philosophy, and to see their leadership just go bananas. um, I can't imagine how hard that must have been for just your random Christian family man in Germany in the 30s whose government has decided to wage war on the world, and you know I, there must have been a huge campaign to stifle dissent, and I just it's just amazing.
Yeah, that whole period of German history is fascinating because you're right. It wasn't like a super majority of Germans followed the Nazis and by any means. It was a minority of people that were so loud that they
Yeah.
were able to, in some ways, smuggle Hitler into the chancellorship at a just political compromise, and they couldn't get rid of the guy, and they couldn't. I feel like they could never weaken that Nazi like power that had taken over and had been very loud and very
Well,
effective.
the Nazis are smart too because they indoctrinated the children early.
They did. They did. Yeah, not just the Hitler Youth, the boys, but also the girls. Like, yeah, and the big desire to like for girls to just be like to produce like male Germans. Like, I mean, the whole thing is just so bananas, and like the thought that Germany, which like you're right, like a very modern, very like intellectual country, could go there, and I think that's why like and not to go down to now this rabbit hole, but
You should do it.
that's
Go down the rabbit hole.
but I think that's what leads people to get to heebie-jeebies with Trump and the MAGA and stuff, because it's the whole Hitler stuff is so fairly fresh.
Well,
Like it's
the similarity might only be I studied political science in college, but I don't remember much of it. But when I see like the just absolute frantic support, like just almost in hysterics in favor of, like anytime I see something at that level, it gives me pause. Like, what's really going on here? Because I'm also a believer in moderation and everything. I don't have to wear my heart on my sleeve politically. If I support like I support conservative policies, but I'm not a maniac about it.
right.
You see this maniacal followership. It's almost like cultish behavior. That's what gives me pause.
Well, and there are similarities between, and this is gonna like people are gonna like they're gonna like roll their eyes at me,
You're gonna get canceled.
but the similarities between the brown shirts of the Nazis and ICE are very eerily similar, because the
Are they?
brown shirts, yeah, here the brown shirt guys were kind of um, poor men within German society that the Nazis gave like a certain sense of like honor and a certain sense of like purpose, right? But then what's interesting about the Nazi history is that when the SS became a thing and they actually killed off a lot of those brown shirts, it was when that there was a group of like more intellectual Nazis that for the sense of becoming more like legitimate within the eyes of Europeans and others, the Nazis started to like move away from like these ignorant, poor white Nazi men who were part of this brown shirt
Why
society
do
that
you
helped
think
that
that?
helped that helped Hitler get to where he ended up being. But then you see Hitler having to then like solidify his power and become a little more legitimate. He had to move away from this kind of like poor, insignificant group of people and take on a different like flavor. And I think I'm not saying there's like a holistically there's a similarity, but I think it gives people like pause. Like when you
Well, I think I hear what you're saying, but I'm missing the parallel with the poor white guys wear the brown shirts, but the ICE agents are it's a governmental branch. It doesn't have anything to
well, and I
do
think
with
where
us.
the viewpoint is that these guys who the military wouldn't take and the police wouldn't take.
Is that a thing? I had not
Yeah,
heard that.
and so but again, like I don't know like to what extent, but like that's where I think this has gone. Where I think that's where people are making these comparisons and similarities. Where you've got a bunch of
Yes.
white men who feel like they're overlooked in American society now, and
I think that
now
would be a misinterpretation of their motivations. I mean, clearly, I come from a perspective of they ICE is tasked with removing criminals that are drain on our resources and public resources. And I listen to a few other podcasts where there's a lot of people that say, oh, but these immigrants that are here undocumented are not criminals. Well, like, they haven't committed a crime. Like, well, yeah, they've broken the law by coming here. There is,
right,
you know I don't think that our immigration policy is working well. I mean, it should be not as difficult as it is to come here legally, but just to skip the line and then take advantage of police, fire, and medical services, and citizenship by birth for your children, which I think it's citizenship by birth is a good thing, but it can be abused as
hmm
it is. Um,
right,
I definitely believe that people who are here illegally should be removed because they are criminals, and
right.
that's his job. I don't know.
And I think
cops too. So I don't know.
And it creates a lot of like weird like repetition of history because and I think it just happens to be this way because our southern border is Mexico, but like it's ethnically centered, right? It's like Hispanics, and then you've got, and I think it creates this again. I'm using the word heebie-jeebies because it gives off this like
It's a discomfort.
it's a discomfort, and I think that and I really wanted to this is one of the things that I wanted to maybe talk about that has really nothing to do with the atomic bomb. But there's a scene with when you remember they're interviewing or they're like cross examining Oppenheimer's wife, Kitty.
Yep. Yep.
And there's a comment that says, well, if he sympathized with communist ideas, doesn't that therefore make him a communist? And she makes the point, no, intellectually being interested in something does not make you that thing. It just, you are intellectually interested.
That's a really good point, and I agree with that.
I think that was one of the most interesting parts of the movie that I think is probably that's why I liked it, because it didn't just talk about the atomic bomb. It brought in the issue, which was very much a fear in the 50s of communism and the influence of communism and McCarthyism.
Yeah.
And that Oppenheimer in his past, and I think that was the whole relationship with the woman and that type of thing, was he
flirted with the ideas briefly.
He did. He flirted with the ideas, and many of those like worked at Caltech and those in that community who are intellectuals by nature are obviously interested in new ideas, and they have friends that are interested in these ideas, and I think it created, and what I liked about that scene is because I think, and I wanted to kind of have a conversation because I think people are unwilling to allow people to be intellectually interested in anything that is opposed to their tribe. So, like, and I don't know if this is true for people like us, but, if we were interested in, for say, I don't know, say we were interested in some kind of, I'm trying to think within the like theological world, what that would look like.
Okay, you're talking about like if you wanted to do a deep dive on like some heresy like Arianism, or
sure, or maybe if you made some comments that I think this is a good one. When it comes like especially like allegorical interpretations of scripture, okay? Origen and some of the early church fathers were, thinking in this level because of the influence of Greek philosophy and these other things. If we were someone who were like thinking through some of these examples and thinking like the allegorical nature to some of these passages, does that mean that we have gone like completely liberal and therefore have come to a point to say that scripture is the historical nature of scripture is not significant or important? We're just, would have gone completely off into like, I don't know, that level of like complete like allegorical interpretation of scripture. I don't believe that you have. I think because Bonhoeffer was one of those people, right? He was someone very much influenced by German scholarship, and therefore someone who would have really gone into the allegorical interpretation of scripture and been less emphasizing the historical nature. And Bonhoeffer is a hero. But I think that there's so much of the world that there are things that are interesting, and there's ways that we kind of start to think about things and then we find them fascinating and we start to become interested in it, and we start to think through it. Does that mean we're adopting the whole package? I don't believe that we are. And I think that the movie brings that out, that at that time in the 30s, that there were people wondering, like, should we be like, how are ways that we can support the workers? How can we be a more like community of society? And so communist ideas were very interesting to those type of people at that time. Now they didn't become communist, but at a point that they were very interested in it, and to a point where Oppenheimer would not receive clearance because of his interests of his past, right? So I just found that as an interesting part of the story.
Is, if you kind of exploring, other ways of thinking. I mean, that doesn't mean you have adopted those other ways, but that is the avenue that you would adopt those other ways if that were to
Right.
happen.
Right.
Mm.
And it creates actually an interesting theory. I'm like, so seminaries in particular, I know that, you went to Southern and Midwestern, and seminaries have a problem because you've got individuals that work on faculty, and by nature, they are questioners. They question, they think, they are developed and trained to be curious and to be in some ways breakers of the establishment, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily fit at times like dogmatic, very structured belief seminaries.
Hmm.
And so there's this idea of like, where does that fit in an institution like that? Could you
Hadn't
be
thought about
someone
that.
who's intellectually interested while not being a heretic? you know,
Well, so
how
is this
far
how,
can you go down that path
well,
while
how do
still
you, is that how
staying?
you develop different seminaries with different theological bents? Like, some of the Bible institutes would have a different theological agenda than, say, some of the other denominational institutions. So those seminaries are going to hire, academics who align with their theology, or are they going to hire an array of guys that would teach from a different perspective for the benefit of the students? Like, how does that? I mean, you used to work at a seminary, right?
Yeah, and I think that's always been the Southern Seminary in particular. Like, they had brilliant people on faculty, but that brilliancy led them to be liberal. Now, eventually, they
Oh,
swung
I thought you were
back.
talking about yourself for a second.
No, no, yeah, they eventually swung back, but there was a time in the recent history that they had professors on faculty, that they were professors that I had, that didn't, because of their intellectual interest, they got like attacked as being like heretical,
I see.
when really they were actually within the fold. But by nature, they tend to they challenge, right? They question,
Well,
they
it's
they
kind of the
study.
scientific method a little bit, that
Exactly. Exactly. So I think that's an interesting part of the story. Like, how does the scientific community fit when, then there's a group of people saying, like, if you're even flirting or interested or send money to, therefore you are one, and therefore should be rejected, and they should get kind of thrown into the darkness.
Yeah.
And that was really the attempt with Oppenheimer, right? Like,
Well,
thank you for
Strauss.
creating the
I think Strauss was abusing a system in order to get revenge on Oppenheimer,
right,
because the guys, when they're distributing security clearances, they're they're following a very strict guideline. They have like a checklist, right?
sure,
And they're not really necessarily there to evaluate the whole character of a person.
right,
They're looking for specific things, like, are you in debt? Do you have a lot of sudden wealth? Like, are you affiliated with any of these specific ideologies? Like, one of them, I remember, one of the questions when I was getting my clearances was like, have you ever supported an organization that wants to overthrow the government of the United States? That those sort of things. And Strauss seemed, from my perspective, to you know kind of like unleash that attack dog on Oppenheimer purely from a vengeance standpoint, because he got his feelings hurt, years and years
right,
before. But so that clearance, where they're giving security clearances, was simply a tool for Strauss to use to hurt Oppenheimer. I
right,
don't think. I mean, even um, I can't believe Matt Damon's character. Said like, I knew that he was the right guy, even though he wasn't really necessarily qualified for the security clearance. So I put him in charge, on purpose.
right,
He was
right.
evaluating the whole character of the guy, and Matt Damon was very much in Oppenheimer's corner, even though they didn't agree on everything.
Mm-mm. Yeah,
Um,
I think and I think Damon's character, the General Groves,
yeah,
was such a good, like, one of the funniest lines is when they are like, the guy was like, he's like, I'm done with this. I can't do this anymore. I can't take this like security, and he makes a joke. I said, I guess we'll kill him now. It's a great quote because you're like, I think like if you're like Oppenheimer, like, well, is that actually what's going to happen? Are they like gonna shoot this guy in the head? But it's just it's a great. I think it's. I am so appreciative of Christopher Nolan, and I think it's because he is one of the few people in Hollywood that are making movies that are just so well thought through and so
He's my
thought
favorite
provoking.
storyteller right now.
Yeah, I just and he's not gotten ruined like his and the more movie he makes, the more and more I'm like, I don't care to watch any of the Batman movies because I'd rather watch this, and this. And I just I'm so appreciative of him and glad that he makes the movies that he makes. And I
I have
think
no
we
idea
benefit.
what his political or religious thoughts and feelings are. I feel like he keeps it out of his films.
He does, obviously, his movies are not
Although
necessarily.
I did kind of thrash him on my article about Interstellar, even though it's one of my favorite movies of all time.
And I think people have problems with that movie, but man, is it the scope that he like presents his movies, and it provides a lot of opportunities and space to just talk about different thoughts and ideas that most movies just never go there. And so, I thought Cillian Murphy was fantastic, and he's such a great actor. And I've liked Pinky
I
Blinders.
Googled how to pronounce his name because I never.
Cillian, right?
Julian says Killian.
Killian, that's right. It's Cillian.
I don't know. I
think you're right.
I never say his name because I don't know how to pronounce it. But
I think you're right. I think it's Killian. And he's so good in this movie. And I thought he's great in Pinky Blinders too. And
I like that.
Pinky Blinders in a lot of ways it fits the like Tony Soprano and Mad Men and Don Draper kind of this kind of like broken, hard character that makes a lot of compromises for the sake of like his family and for other reasons, and a lot of it kills his soul. So it's such a great movie. It's been a while since I watched it, and I'm so glad we got to talk about it. And I can't wait for Odyssey to be out because I think it provides another opportunity to talk about Nolan.
I am sitting on the edge of my seat waiting to see how this thing with Elliot Page goes.
Oh, right.
I trust Nolan's making abilities and storytelling implicitly.
Yep.
I have no idea what to expect with that. It is so confusing to me. It seems off-brand, honestly.
Yeah, I think we, in a lot of ways, Nolan is kind of like the Lord of the Rings for like Christian men. Like there's this like world that it's not clearly Christian, but it's like there's so much there that provides so much stimulation, and we get to talk about it and stuff. And I'm afraid of the Lord of the Rings and where they go because they get further away from like the Tolkien stuff that I don't know if that's stuff that we will appreciate and enjoy as much.
You got to keep it with the original canon. You can't go out too far outside that.
yeah, and so hopefully we'll get to talk about Odyssey and the coming whatever weeks or stuff like that. So, well, what else? What are we doing next?
I haven't thought about it, but we're gonna do something good.
Wait, I like your idea of doing like the British trilogy of. Yeah. You do like King's Speech. Then you do Darkest Hour.
Okay.
And then you do Dunkirk.
Right.
I think that would be good.
Rather than do 3 individual things, what if we did all 3 of them in one?
We could do that.
That way we can keep it. Let's do let's do all 3 movies together that way because it's going to be thematically consistent.
And I'll cut this out, but yeah, he really is. And I'll ask you there's a great line from Oppenheimer that he combined physics in New Mexico, and that's what makes him happy. what would be your two combinations, thing and place, to make you happy? Because he grew up around the Los Alamos area, and so like he
so he was
riding
doing what he
horses.
loved, where he lived.
Yes.
Oh
What would
man,
be your combination there?
maybe if I could like have a house that was like beachfront, like Hawaiian
Yep.
on one side, like with the Tetons right behind me.
Nice.
And then I could
Yes.
maybe I could have like a golf course on this side all the way down, and then a tennis court over here.
Yes. That's pretty good. I would probably Tetons is a beautiful place. I would probably say something to the effect of doing I don't know, some type of church ministry thing there, because that place is just a gorgeous place.
Well, you're
And
pretty close, man. You're doing ministry in Colorado.
yeah, we're pretty close. I was pretty happy that it wasn't that far. Well, thanks, man, for jumping on this. Great movie. Encourage people to go watch it. Just fast forward the nude scenes, because those aren't. They're just a bit awkward. I'll say this real quick. Did you catch the JFK reference in the movie? First time I caught it was in this movie.
About where they talk about there's a young, influential freshman congressman from Massachusetts?
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't catch that the first time I saw it. I'm like, oh, there's a JFK
Yeah.
drop.
Yeah.
So fantastic. All right, man. Well, thanks a lot for jumping on this, and we'll set up something else soon.